Punch, Nexon, Harrier, Safari, Curve. You know what's common between all these Tata SUVs? They are all monocoque and they're all front-wheel drive. In fact, today, Tata Motors does not make an SUV in the proper SUV sense of the term. But it wasn't always so. And in fact, pre-pandemic, pre-2020, pre-BS6, Tata Motors did have proper SUVs. And this is the very last of it. Okay, it doesn't really look like an SUV, but we will come to that in a bit. But this was body on frame. This was rear wheel drive. This had the option of all wheel drive. This is the Tata Hexa. The Aria had hints of the Indica styling lineage, but the Hexa was completely different in terms of the design. Now, this was one of the very first Tata cars to be designed under the stewardship of Pratap Bose, then the global head of Tata Motors design, and the thing that he turned out looked really, really good. Even today, the Hexa is a very attractive looking vehicle. Butch, macho, this is a traditional MPV, but it doesn't look like a traditional MPV. Doesn't look anything like an Innova or even the Crysta. Now, the wheels, this was a huge talking point. The top-end Hexa, that came with 19-inch wheels as standard. And if memory serves me right, only the Audi Q7 got 19s, and that too as an option. These are 16s, that's why they don't fill out the wheel arches completely, but those 19s gave Tata Motors a lot of headaches. We will also talk about that in a bit. That's why a lot of the Hexa that you see running around right now are on the smaller wheels. These smaller wheels also give really good ride comfort. Again, that's another thing that we are going to talk about. And I should point out, these LED tail lamps. Now, back then, we're talking about 2017, Tata Motors could not find a vendor in India to give high quality LED tail lamps. So they tapped LG in South Korea for the tail lamps. The interiors, the seat fabric was done by Mercedes' supplier. They went all over the world scouting for the best suppliers for the Hexa, because Tata Motors had a problem then, and that problem was perception. The Indica hangover was still alive and present. The Aria, even though it was a differentiated product, did not have top-of-the-line quality, and Tata Motors really needed to address quality, and they did that in stunning fashion with the Hexa. And I must point out that the Hexa had twin exhausts, but only one of them was genuine. Welcome to Gone But Not Forgotten, and welcome to our throwback on the very last 4x4 from Tata Motors. And of course, if you enjoy this Gone But Not Forgotten series, don't forget to stay subscribed to the Evo India channel. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up and share this with like-minded enthusiasts. Should Tata Motors bring back 4x4's body on frames? Let us know in the comments. The Hexa is huge, 4.78 meters in length, slightly longer than a Crysta. The wheelbase, 2850 mm, 100 millimeters more than the Crysta, and that means you do get a very comfortable middle row. Now, you had the option of captain seats or this bench seat. This bench seat also slides, so you do have a lot of space, very comfortable seats. You also get these sun blinds. Back then, I don't think anything got these sun blinds. And over in the third row, again, enough space for two people. Benny out there also has aircon vents in the C-pillar. There's a cup holder. So plenty of creature comforts. It is a little cooped in because the glass area is not that big, so you do feel a little cooped in over there, but it's comfortable. The Crysta had a little bit more space in the third row, to be honest, but this wasn't cramped by any means. Seoul, it started off as Safari Owners United League. Then when the Hexa, the Aria came along, it became SUV Owners United League. And it's still alive, sort of. Tata Motors still do a lot of drives with the Seoul community. I remember the last drive that I did with the Hexa, that was to Arunachal Pradesh. We had a fleet of, I think, 15 Hexas, another 5-10 Safaris. And those days, roads in Arunachal were in poor shape. But these things, the way they dealt with those roads was unbelievable. We went to some really remote areas because these things could go over terrain like no others. It was really solid, great fun to drive. In fact, I remember because of those 19-inch tires on the Hexa, we carried, I think, 10 or 12 spare tires. We only got one tire failure, and that was when a sidewall got cut because we went too close to a rock. But otherwise, these things were fantastically reliable. And those soul drives were actually an excellent community building initiative from Tata Motors. In fact, even today, a lot of the old generation Safaris and Hexas, you will see these soul stickers. Most of those owners have taken their cars on these soul drives, and I hope more of this happens very soon. Safety was also a huge priority for Tata Motors even back then. So the Hexa, it got 6 airbags as standard on the top end version. It also got ABS, ESP, the 4x4, the XTA model that got hill hold assist and hill descent control. And even today, people who have the top end Hexa, they can't stop raving about the 10 speaker JBL branded sound system. But this is too fiddly. Tata Motors used to have this chronic problem. Their seats were very good, the Safari seats, excellent. But the armrest used to always sag, would always foul in the way of shifting gears. So they did away with the armrest on the Hexa. Also, the center consoles used to rattle. But here, this lid is spring loaded. And this particular car, it's a 2017 car. It's done 70,000 kilometers. And I'm saying this for a fact. I've driven it for a fair bit now. Nothing is rattling. We all had this huge thing that Tata Motors interiors rattle, squeaks, all of that happen. But this car, nothing happens. Another friend of Evo, Anush, he does 50,000 kilometers every year in his Hexa. And he says that again, the interiors, nothing rattles. These seats are honestly superb. They really should have these same seats in today's Safari and Harrier because these are really stunning. They're excellent in terms of the creature comforts. Now, I remember in our first drive, I talked about how the plastics, most of them was soft touch plastic. So the top of the dash, all these things that you normally touch, all of them are soft touch plastics. Only very few hard plastic parts, but the sense of quality was very good. The size of the screen, not very good, very small. And back then they were obsessed with this Connect Next app. They didn't have Apple CarPlay. They had Connect Next. So on your phone, you had to have an app which would then connect to CarPlay and all of that jazz, which honestly was too fiddly for me. Again, lots of buttons, so ease of operation. The dials, like what Tata Motors does today also, the numbers are too small. There's so much of space, but the dials, the numbers are just too small. In terms of information, everything is there. This also had a chiller, little fiddly to open, but you had a chiller out here, spring-loaded compartment, the glove box below that, lots of space for bottle holders, your sunglass holder on the right above the driver. If you recall, the Aria, it had this whole row, a bank of sunglass holders on the roof. That was done away with. It had only one sunglass holder. And of course, those days, we didn't have an obsession with the sunroof. So no sunroof on the Hexa, not on any versions. You have this drive mode controller out here. This is the 4x2 rear wheel drive. You also had the 4x4, and the 4x4 was only available with the manual. The manual 6-speed manual gearbox, the engine 400 Newton meters of torque on the top end spec of this engine. So properly powerful, and let's get on the road to experience that. I know I mentioned about the seats, but I really do have to mention it again. These are phenomenal. I don't know why Tata Motors doesn't continue using these very same seats. In terms of support, the lateral support, the under thigh support, everything is phenomenal. You can do hours and hours and hours behind the wheel. And I did it. So we had a Hexa with us on long-term test. And the one that we had was the automatic gearbox with the higher power engine, the 400 Newton meter spec, Varicor 400. And I spent a lot of time in that Hexa. It was really great through road trip along. Even that drive through Arunachal in that Hexa, it remains one of my highlights in terms of all those road trips that I did. And today, driving the Hexa once again, it really does feel nice. So 400 Newton meters of torque, even today, is very good. It's very strong. There is a lot of grunt. There was a lower spec version with 320 Newton meters, but this is the 400 Newton meters. Third gear, you step on it, and it does pull very well. When we tested it back then, 0 to 100 took 14 seconds for the manual, 12 odd seconds for the automatic. That automatic gearbox was actually very good. But if you wanted all-wheel drive, you could only get that with the manual gearbox. Now, this manual gearbox, it's a 6-speed manual gearbox, not a 5-speed manual gearbox. You're getting the drift, right, of what I'm saying. Tata Motors did not skimp on anything with the Hexa. Every single thing that they could get their hands on, they threw at the Hexa. Now, what does the Hexa feel like after all these years? You have a great view ahead. The driving position is excellent, but the steering, it only adjusts for height, not for reach. But for my body structure, this is very good. I have zero complaints. Huge turning circle, and the steering, this is power assisted, but lot of effort required, especially when you're doing 3-pointed turns. The other thing, lots of turbo lag. Until the engine spins up to around 1800 RPM, it's practically dead. So you have to keep it on the boil. And that means when you're driving in the mountains, you also do need to shift gears a fair bit. The gear shift quality, it's not like those old Tata Motors gearboxes which were like full slushy and it was like you were finding a small stone in a pool of mud. Here, this is kind of precise, nothing great, nothing outstanding, but not too bad either. The brake feel and the stopping power is good. The performance is good. The turn of speed is nice. The refinement is good. I'll step on it. That's 4,500 RPM. And it's not making a major racket. And the way it is going over those bumps, stunning. Today's Safari does not ride as well as yesterday's Hexa. The Hexa is a big car, it is a heavy car, 2.3 tons. And it doesn't feel smaller than it actually is. It doesn't shrink itself around you. You're always aware of its size and its weight. For some people, this is actually a good thing because this is what gives it that SUV driving feel. It doesn't feel like a Innova to drive, which is, well, behind the wheel, you're like a taxi driver, right? But here, it does have sort of that SUV-ishness, which is a cool thing, and that is what appealed to so many owners of the Hexa. That's why a lot of people still have the Hexa, however few those are, but those people still retain the Hexa because they like the driving stance, the feel that it gives you from behind the wheel, which is definitely there. It's not some imaginary thing that those guys are spouting on about. It does feel good to drive. Turn of speed is good. Rear wheel drive. Switch off ESP and you can get the tail to slide around a bit. Now I'm not going to do this to somebody's dearly loved Hexa, but back when it was new, when we had it on test, I did put it sideways and you can do it. It's got the torque. Oh, the big problem with the Hexa, those 19-inch wheels. Now, with these 16s, the ride is unbelievably good. With the 19s, it was a bit firmer, but still it had that magic carpet ride. In fact, I remember describing it almost on par with an Audi Q7. And for its time, the Audi Q7 was the most comfortable riding SUV you could buy in India. And the Hexa was very, very close to the Audi Q7's benchmark. That was the first time an Indian manufacturer was putting such big wheels on their SUV. And those tires had so many failures. If you look up on those Team BHP threads of that time, there are like reams and reams of threads of people cribbing about their tires getting pinched, lots of problems. It was also the fact that Indians weren't very conscious about how to take care of the tires, how to run the right tire pressure. So that's why there were also a lot of failures. But overall, that incident scarred Tata Motors so much that today they really resist the urge to go for really big wheels. The Curve has got the largest wheels at 18 inches, though it has been designed for 19 inches. And I don't think they will put 19s because those Hexa memories are still alive in Tata Motors' service network. If you were to compare the Hexa to cars of its time, and the only real thing you could compare it with was the Innova Crysta, the Crysta had better handling. It was more tied down. The Hexa the faster you go, the better and better the ride quality gets. The outright ride comfort is better than the Crysta. But the downside is there is more body movement, there is more body roll when you go around corners. So in a straight line, the Hexa would struggle to keep up with a Crysta, but around a bumpy road, and when the road gets a little bit bad, the Hexa just opens up a gap on the Crysta. But the Crysta was nobody's benchmark for an Enthu cutlet, whereas the Hexa, it would inject that dose of enthusiasm into your driving style. In fact, when the Hexa was launched, Adil, he had just bought his Innova Crysta. He sat in the Hexa on that first drive. I think it was around Hyderabad. He loved the seats and he loved it so much that I think a month or two later he sold the Crysta and he bought a Hexa, and he still uses that Hexa. He's still a huge fan of the Hexa. Now this is a person who drives all kinds of cars, but his daily driver in Pune city is still a Hexa, and that tells you something about the Hexa and also about the loyalty that it inspires amongst its fan base and amongst its owner base. There are people who are complaining about the dealership experience and that the parts are now more difficult to get and all of that, but there are also people who swear by the Hexa. So this really has both sides of the story. I'm honestly surprised by the outpouring of love for the Hexa. We put up some of my old pictures on Instagram, asked you guys for comments, and such positive comments. In fact, so many of you asked, when is Tata Motors going to bring back the Hexa? Honestly, I do not have the answer, and honestly, I do not think it is coming back. Now they're going to focus on their newer platforms. This I don't think will even meet the new G NCAP and Bharat NCAP crash safety regulations. So this is it for the Hexa. But there is one comment in particular that I want to point out. Advocate Gaudaksh, he points out that this had Penta-Link suspension, 10 JBL speakers, hydraulic hood, cruise control, auto headlights, Benico leather seats. I think that was the same vendor as Mercedes-Benz, rear window blinds, 10 AC vents, magic carpet ride. He says that not even 50 lakh plus cars had all these options. Plus it had 4-wheel disc brakes, wraparound tail lamp, LED brake lights, the butterfly wipers, 10 cup holders, heated ORVMs on this car. Back then, nothing had these kind of options. And I must reiterate, the Hexa, it doesn't rattle, it doesn't squeak. The build quality actually is very good. In fact, Tata Motors should use Hexa owners as testimonials to upgrade their image of build quality. People did have niggling issues. The quality wasn't on par with the Innova Crysta, nor was it longevity. From whatever we used to with Tata Motors, quality was a huge step up. But do you have any other observations, any other comments? Let us know in the comment section below. Back when he did the road test of the Hexa in 2017, Adil, in his column, had a very good observation. He said that lightning doesn't strike twice. Now, going back to the Aria in terms of pricing, Tata Motors did not get it right. It was priced bang against the Innova, and it was nowhere as reliable or durable as the Innova. And that's why the Aria bombed. And Adil said that Tata Motors would not make the same mistake again, and they did not make that same mistake. In fact, the top-end versions with the automatic gearbox, the Hexa was almost 5 lakh rupees cheaper than the Innova Crysta. So it was great value, very nice to drive. For the driver, the Hexa was always better. But even though the Hexa made a big step up in terms of quality, durability, reliability, all of that, it was still not as good as the Innova Crysta. And that meant not that many people bought the Hexa compared to the Crysta. And that meant that the numbers never came. And that meant that when it was time to upgrade these cars to BS6 emission norms, Tata Motors, they did not upgrade this Varicor engine. And that was that for the Hexa. The Hexa was always built with a short lifespan in mind, sort of like a bridge product between the Safari and all those legacy products and the new monocoque SUVs that would come later on. But Tata Motors product planners, they did want to keep the Hexa alive. In fact, at the 2020 Auto Expo, they did show a Safari edition of the Hexa. Very confusing, I know. And then there was the Gravitas, which got called the Safari. So lot of naming confusion, and in the end, the Hexa was just given a quiet burial, which was sad. Of course, it did not have the volumes to justify the upgrade, but the Hexa, even those people who owned the Hexa, they really loved the Hexa, and the Hexa could have kept that body on frame, all-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, that whole thing alive for a bit. But unfortunately, no longer, and I don't think the Hexa is coming back. And that's why that was the end of the Hexa story. But even today, you drive a Hexa and it is great to drive. It is comfortable. It feels really solid. It doesn't feel like an MPV. It feels like a proper SUV. The Hexa is gone, but I don't think it will ever be forgotten. What are your thoughts on the Hexa? Let us know in the comments. And of course, if you have suggestions on the next cars we should feature on Gone But Not Forgotten, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to stay subscribed to the Evo India channel. Thank you guys for watching.